Hello everyone, welcome back to FIDE. This is lesson number 3 of the Road to Chess Master series. We're making excellent progress and soon we will be ready to play our first game, but not yet. In this lesson, we will discuss the relative value of the pieces, making a lot of emphasis on the bishop versus knight. And now that we know how to move the pieces, check the link on the description if you missed that lesson. We are ready to learn how captures happen. If you have yet to subscribe to the channel, do so now because you do not want to miss all the good stuff I have for you guys as this course progresses. Alright, let's jump straight into the video. Here on the board, I have all the pieces. I have lined them up in order of importance. We have the king, queen, rook, bishop, knight, and pawn. I'm going to leave the king for last. The queen is our most powerful piece, and we learned this when I was explaining to you how the pieces moved. The queen can move in a diagonal, and it can move in a straight line, and it can go as many spaces as it can. Because of this, we give the queen the most value, and we give the queen a value of 9 points. Moving now to the rook. The rook is our second most valuable piece. And remember that it moves in a straight line, in any direction. And we give the rook a value of 5 points. Next, I want to talk about the bishop versus the knight. Many books say that the bishop and knight are worth 3 points, but I disagree. Every grandmaster will tell you that the bishop is a lot stronger than the knight. Bishops are much more powerful. They control long diagonals. They can go from one side to the board to the other very quickly, as compared to the knight, where it takes a long time for it to move. And in a lot of cases, the knight can actually be trapped by a bishop, and we will see that very soon in another lesson. The only good thing about knights is that in close positions, the knight can actually jump pieces and the bishop cannot. But that's not enough of a reason to say that the bishop is not stronger than the knight. So for that reason, I'm going to give the bishop a value of 3.5 points and the knight a value of 3 points. And now let's talk about the little guy, the pawn. The pawns are the hard-working individuals of the chess game. That's why we have 8 of them, because these are the pieces that launch forward, get sacrificed, and practically the entire game revolves around the pawns and the pawn structure. And because of this, we give the pawns a value of just 1 point. Now, I have left the king for last. And how come I have done this? Well, the king has no value. The entire purpose of the chess game is to checkmate the king, not to capture the king. This is the only piece, as we will see now, that cannot be captured. If you checkmate the king, the game is over. Now that we know the value of the pieces, it's time to learn how the pieces capture. And we're going to start with the king. As a quick review, how does the king move? Remember that the king can move one space in any direction. So highlighted here by the arrows, the king can move to any of these 8 squares. So does that mean that the king can capture both the knight and the rook at the same time? Well, the answer to that is no. The king can only capture one of these pieces, and when it does so, it will just replace that piece and it will occupy that square. So if the king were to capture the knight, it would just occupy that square. Notice that we're not jumping. This is not checkers, this is chess. We don't jump the piece to the other side. If we wanted to capture this rook, we will simply move into the same square that the rook is, and we will occupy that square with our king. Next, let's talk about the queen. To highlight the importance of the queen and how strong this piece is, remember, it is worth 9 points. I have placed the black pieces in certain positions. Notice how this rook and this pawn are very far away, and this knight is very close. And again, the queen is attacking all of these 3 pieces. Notice that it's attacking this knight, it's attacking this pawn, and it's attacking the rook. Does that mean that the queen can capture all 3 pieces at the same time? No. We can only capture one of these pieces. And since you already know the value of the pieces, which one should the queen capture in this situation? If you set the rook, that's correct. The rook is worth 5 points, the knight is worth 3, and the pawn 1 point. So here we would just grab our queen, place it in the same square that the rook was, and it will replace the rook there. All right, let's move straight into the rook now. Remember, the rook moves in a straight line, so it moves in this direction or in this direction. So the rook can capture one of these two pieces. If this was a real game, you will not be able to take the knight because then the bishop will actually capture the rook. So if you had to play this in a real game, the rook will just capture the bishop. Again, you will land in the same square and it will replace the piece that was there with itself. In this position, we have the bishops. To review, remember the bishops move in a diagonal. So the light square bishop will move in the light square diagonal and the dark square bishop will move in the dark square diagonal. Notice that this light square bishop cannot move past where the queen is. I cannot grab this bishop and move it all the way to this square. If I wanted to move there, I would first have to capture the queen. And when we capture a piece, we replace that piece with our own and we leave it in that square. The same thing with the dark square bishop. If I wanted to capture either the knight or the rook, I would just grab my bishop, put her in that square, and I will replace my piece with that one. How about the knight? Can this knight capture this bishop in one go? Well, let's review how the knight moves. Remember that the knight moves 2 spaces in a straight line and then 1 space to the side. 1, 2 spaces, 1 to the side. So the knight can go here. The knight can also go 1, 2 spaces to this side and go here. But the bishop seems to be very far away. So if this knight standing on this square wanted to capture the bishop on that square, how many turns will we need with the white pieces? If you said 2 turns, that's correct. We would go 1, 2, 1 to the side. This will be 1 turn. And then we would go 1, 2, 1 to the side, 2 turns, and we will capture that piece. So we will go 1, and on the next turn, after black moves, we will go knight takes. We'll replace the bishop with our knight, and the knight will be standing on that square all by itself. I have left the pawn for last because the pawn is special. The pawn is the only piece in chess that does not capture in the same way that it moves. So quickly, let's review how the pawn moves. I'm going to go ahead and grab another pawn and place it here on the other side of the board in its original position. Remember, the pawn can either move 1 space or 2 spaces. So coming here to the diagram, does that mean that the pawn can move 2 spaces and capture this pawn? Well, the answer to that is no. The pawns capture in a diagonal to the square adjacent to it or next to it, moving forward. If in this situation, it would be this pawn. So we will be able to capture this pawn here. And then if it was our turn again, then we can capture that pawn there. In situations like this pawn cannot move any further because that's not how we capture. And since we cannot move anymore, we cannot go past this pawn. Now, if there was a piece there to the sides of the pawn, directly adjacent to it in a diagonal, then we can go ahead and capture one of those 2 pieces. We can either capture the rook or capture the bishop, but not the pawn. All right, everyone, that concludes this lesson. Now you know the value of the pieces and you know how the pieces capture. And from previous lessons, you know how the pieces move. So we're very, very close to playing our first game. Just a few more minor details. Again, if you have not subscribed, this is your opportunity. Subscribe now, as there will be a lot more videos to come. And as always, stay safe, have a great day, and show respect to your opponent. See you next time.